Now, when it comes to improv, I know that you'll meet people who'll be like, well, it's improv. You can do whatever you just want, right? But I do believe that with improv, there are some rules, there are some guidelines, and there are some structure that you should follow, which helps to create a very strong improvised scene. And that's what we're going to talk about here is what are the elements and what are the rules when creating a long form improvised scene. And the first element is what I like to call is today's the day. And what that means is that every scene has to have a very clear what is this scene about? Who are these people? And where are we? And you have to set that up pretty much for your audience, right? Because the thing with improv is that you don't want your audience ever to be like, what is going on? I don't understand, right? Also, with improv, it's very, very important that you always have to be driving the scene forward. So, the first line of dialogue in an improvised scene should be the today's the day. And I'll give you an example. So, if I'm a character and I walk on and I say, hey, I just looked at your x rays and it looks like you broke your arm, the audience knows that number one, I'm probably a doctor. Number two, the person I'm talking to broke their arm. And then number three, we're probably at a doctor's office. And I established all of that in one sentence. And that's what's known as a today's the day, right? And remember, it has to be a very organic thing. You can't be like, hey, I'm here at the doctor's office and you, sir, broke your leg, right? It can be a very natural, grounded line of dialogue. And remember, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Today's the day can be as simple as like, I maxed out my credit cards. Or, oh my gosh, it's like your lawn always grabs my attention, right? You know that like I might be your neighbor, we're outside, and I'm talking about your lawn, right? And you can set up all of those things in one simple sentence, and that is called the today's the day. And you have to set that up, or else your scene partner won't have a clue what's going on. But if you give them that gift, and that detail, then they know exactly where they are. The audience is also in sync, and you are also in sync. So your scene has already started off on an amazing foot. Now let's talk about some other things too. Number two, don't ask questions. Don't ask questions in a scene. Just make statements. Answer the questions. The worst is when you have two characters come out like, "Hey, how you doing?" Hey, I'm doing good. How are you doing? Right? Like it doesn't really, questions do not really drive improvised scenes forward, but answering the questions and making statements do. So if I said, if I asked the question of like, hey, how's it going? That kills the scene. But if I said, man, you look really tired today, that drives the scene forward because I just let my scene partner know that they have to play tired. And that's the great thing about when you're making statements instead of questions is you're giving a gift to your scene partner. You're kind of directing your scene partner like via camouflage and the audience doesn't know, right? When I say, man, you're looking tired today, it's kind of me directing my scene partner to let them know like, hey, you might need to play tired in this scene, right? So it's very important to not ask questions. Also, it's just, don't put that on your scene partner. Like I've seen improvisers where they just like constantly ask questions and you can tell the other scene partner is like, man, you're just like you're forcing me to like come up with all of this stuff versus it happening organically, right? So questions, big no. Do not ask questions in an improvised scene. Just make the statement. Answer the question yourself because when you do that, it drives the scene forward. Number three, relationships. Dude, in the improv world, the relationship should be at least 6 months. You should never have an improvised scene where people meet for the first time, right? Like they should always know each other for at least 6 months. And I'll give you an analogy. Like the worst thing that I always hate about Batman movies is that a lot of the Batman movies, we have to waste like an hour like learning the origin story, and nobody really cares about the origin story, right? Like that's why we always thought the other Batman movies were a lot better because it just gets to the action. Same thing in improv, right? We don't need to see the origin story of the relationship between these two characters. Just get to it. That's why it's great to use the 6-month rule, right? Any two characters within an improvised scene have already known each other for at least 6 months because, again, that's driving the scene, right? That's moving the scene forward. And here's the thing. I know a lot of people, I always get a lot of pushback because people are like, well, the audience doesn't know. Trust me, the audience is smart, right? They will understand. They will get the relationship, all right? But the rule is 6 months, drive it forward. The other thing too, don't get stuck talking about stuff that is not there, right? Like in improv, obviously we have to create fake worlds and fake props, but remember, you don't see it because it's all improvised, right? So you don't see this cup, you don't see this soda that I'm holding right now. But the thing is I will see improvisers who will talk about stuff that is not there. Do not talk about items that are not there. You can interact with them and have the physicality, but do not let the scene become about two characters talking about something that the audience can't see. Because remember, that's the important thing. The audience cannot see it. So do not talk about it that much. Don't let it become the focal point of the scene, okay? The other thing, too, is don't talk about characters that aren't there. Right? So if you have a scene going on and your two improvisers are talking about a character that is not in the scene, well, one of the other improvisers better jump out and play that character, right? I see this happen a lot in an improvised scene is that you've got two people and they're talking about how much they don't like grandma, but we never get to see grandma, right? So it's kind of that like show, don't tell, right? That's a big thing in improv. It's like if you're going to, don't tell us about grandma, show us that grandma's a bad person, right? That's a big thing. Like if the two, improvisers are talking about, our uncle is crazy, I don't want you to tell me about it. Show us. It's improv. Show. Don't tell. Show, don't tell. And I see that happen a lot, right? Like it becomes a talking head scene and it's like, don't tell us about it. Show us. Don't tell us about what's happening. Show us what's happening. Don't tell us about what happened to you before the scene. Jump to it and show us, right? Show us everything. Because if you show us, the audience is more engaged versus telling the audience, right? And I say that because think of it like this. Some of the best teachers on the planet use visuals and things to show us stuff, right? Like when you're in a class, it sucks when you're sitting in class and the teacher is just lecturing on and on and on about algebra. But if they show us some cool things and videos and they're showing us some whatever, we're more connected to it. Same thing in improv. You got to show it, don't tell it, so your audience will connect to it a lot sooner. Another component that makes a very strong improvised scene is always make it about the relationship. Always make it about the relationship within the scene, right? So for example, if your neighbor if an improviser comes out and they're playing your neighbor and they say something like, oh man, your grass is looking great, as an improviser, you might react and be like, okay, sir, can you please stop hitting on me? I know you're not really talking about my grass. I know you're talking about me, right? So always make it about the relationship, right? Because again, remember, we can't see the grass. We can't see the yard. It's all fictional. It's all made up. The audience can't see it. So it's very, very important as an improviser to always make the scene personal. Always make it about the relationship, right? Because that's what the important thing is in an improvised scene. And even in theater and TV and film, it is about the relationship of the characters. So always make it personal. Last thing too is always have an objective or always have a want, right? So for example, we talked about the today's the day. So your today's the day might be like, I maxed out my credit cards, but in my mind, my objective would be like, let's, sway grandma into making her sign up for a credit card so I get some money, right? You want to have your character to have a want or an objective within the scene. And this is the same thing you would see in TV, film, or theater, is the characters always have an objective, right? And here's the thing. That's kind of where the comedic element comes from, is your objective and your justification for the objective, right? Justification is also a very, very important thing in an improvised long-form scene, is you have to justify your actions. You have to justify your objective. You have to justify why you're acting the way you are. And that's actually a really funny comedic element. That's what comes into play, is the justification, right? Because an improvised scene is not about trying to be funny. It's about staying true to the scene, but also justifying your kind of quirky actions. And we'll talk about that in another video when we talk about what makes an improvised character interesting. But it's all about justifying why do you act the way that you are. And those are the rules. And there are many other rules and there's many different styles. But to me personally, in my opinion, this is my style of rules that I use when teaching a long form improvised scene that I believe has the most success.